Hello, it's just David here with my weekly video. Um, Now that we've finished our 10 questions, and if we carry on with these videos for a bit, they are going to, I think, become increasingly random in what I talk about. It may just be something has kicked off a thought. And yes, something did kick off a thought this afternoon. And I'm going to start in a slightly odd place, which is some of you may know I used to be a not very good mathematician at university. And but one of the kind of quantities that interested me, as it did lots of mathematicians, was infinity. Now, infinity, once you kind of do a sum that goes to infinity, you're kind of stuck. It's a very difficult thing to deal with infinity, because say, for instance, if you divide any number by zero, you get infinity, and if you do that on your computer stops working. Very often, if you you get one of those blue screen moments on the computer, it's because a bug in the program has tried to divide something by zero. And when we think of infinity, the trouble is we just think of a sort of very, very big number. And of course, infinity is a bit more than that. It's the whole point is it's something which is beyond numbers. There are in fact various levels of infinity that mathematicians talk about, but that's becoming a bit complex and probably beyond the scope of this video. But yeah, and I think not only that, we're actually kind of quite unable to deal with big numbers. I mean, one of the things I think about in lots of sort of public announcements and statistics, and and to be honest, statistics with coronavirus as well, is that once people get very, very big numbers, they lose track of what they mean. So if I say to you, we've just spent £100 million on something as a nation, you think, goodness me, what a lot of money. And yeah, well, it's about £1.30 per person. It's not a huge amount of money for a nation. And if I say to you, imagine 1 million people, and then I say, okay, now imagine 1 billion people, really probably your image, if you've got an image on your, if you imagine sort of the faces of 1 million people, probably hasn't changed much, because if I flashed up an image of a million people and then a billion, you probably wouldn't be able to tell, because actually both numbers are just so beyond what we'd be used to be able to count or to enumerate that it's kind of meaningless. The reason I say all this is to do with the fact that God is infinite, and he therefore has sort of unlimited resources. And I'm thinking about this because I'm thinking about it in connection with sort of moral questions, really. One of the things that struck me, I was never very good at ethics, but was that about sort of ethics and moral questions is that people, well, they always frame them in terms of sort of, is it right or wrong to do X, Y, or Z? So is it right to lie? Is it right to have an abortion? Is it right to do this, that, and the other? And it seems to me that actually in real life, moral dilemmas, because we live in an infinite world, a finite world rather, they're never quite like that. They tend, I mean, obviously there are some, but I mean, most of us don't go around thinking, well, shall I murder somebody today? Most of the time, moral dilemmas come in the form of, choosing between two evils, So, I mean, the classic example, you should tell the truth, you shouldn't lie. But if the Nazi guards comes to you and says, are the Jews hiding in the cellar? Then, I think most of us would think the moral thing to do, if they are, is to lie, because that will save a life, which is a much more important thing than a lie. And we talk about sort of little white lies, don't we? It's actually something called the double effect principle. If you know that a certain action is going to lead to two evils, kind of whatever you choose, then the moral thing to do is to choose the lesser evil. I was thinking about this because very often, we are confronted, I think, by our finitude, the fact that we are finite. So, I was thinking about it today because really I had a choice in a certain action. I won't go into details, but between sort of making sure somebody I knew was safe and looked after, and then trying to help somebody else who was asking for help. And I couldn't do both things, and actually they had to be done sort of simultaneously. And I made my choice, as it were. But that's very often the way. And just in terms of time, for instance, sometimes I think, well, I've made an appointment with somebody. They're expecting to see me. Perhaps I'm discussing something quite important with them. And then somebody else says, "Oh, right, can I have some of your time?" And you have to think, well, yes, you can, but actually, I've got to keep this appointment with the other person. And sometimes the person then who's asking for the help feels a bit dejected and says something like, "Well, you haven't got time for me then," and you say, "Well, I kind of, well, could you come back later?" Or so, "Oh, don't bother," and it feels quite difficult. And that's because we're finite. We can't, there are so many hours in the day. We've only got so much energy. We've only got so much money and resources as people that there's lots of things we should do. Should we help feed the hungry? Well, yes, and I can probably stretch to feeding one hungry person, but with the best will in the world, I can't feed everybody. um, so who's hungry, that is. So always we are confronted by the fact, even when we try to do good, when we try to be charitable, when we're trying to sort of help other people, that we have sort of finite resources. And as I say, very often we're choosing between helping one person, helping another. We're choosing between the lesser of two evils, because that's the problem. We are limited in what we can do. We can't be in two places at the same time. We can't give away more than we've got, etc. Of course, this is the thing that then becomes theological. This is when we can talk about God, because I think when we say God is infinite, one of the dangers is that we think God is just very, very big. And that's a rather different thing. So, sometimes people will say something like, I can't really believe, oh, God in heaven looks after every human being and every animal and every thing that's ever existed, and maybe there's life on other planets, and he has to look after all the aliens as well, etc., etc. And I just think of, I can't imagine all those sort of tiny little animals and plants and all that, and I can't imagine how they could all kind of somehow be in heaven. And of course, in a sense, yes, we can't imagine that. But however kind of many human beings there have been, and whether you think animals go to heaven or not is irrelevant in a sense. Whatever you kind of think might be redeemed, if you like, it is finite. I mean, the universe is finite. It's existed for a certain amount of time. A certain amount of creatures, sentient creatures, have lived in it, even if there are aliens and life forms on other planets, which there might well be, because again, there's millions of galaxies which we can't really comprehend. However much it is still finite, and it's beyond our comprehension. And God is infinite, so there is room in God, if you like, for all of creation to be redeemed. And I think sometimes also then when that's the thing about handing things over in prayer, isn't it? That it's not like I've done my bit and God then does his bit, but I mustn't give too much to God because he can't cope. I mean, in a sense, I kind of do my bit, or someone's trying to do our bit, whatever. But actually, in a sense, we can quite happily, day after day, hand everything over to God. And everybody in the world can do that because God's infinite. And that's something, again, perhaps we find difficult in prayer. We think somehow, has God still got any grace left for me? And he's had to deal with everything in the world today and history and everything. Is there a time when God thinks, oh, enough is enough, I can't deal with this anymore? And the answer is no. That's the extraordinary thing about infinity. There is no limit to God's grace and resources. But there is a limit to ours. And sometimes I think we have to recognize that in the decisions we make. And that's why ultimately, it's rather a glib thing for Christians to say as well, I can't help you, but I'll pray and I'll hand it over to God. But actually, it may be glib, and sometimes it may be an excuse, but actually it's also true. In a sense, we do what we can, and actually the rest we just do hand over to God, and we rely on his infinite grace. Thank you.